Okay, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our last session of the Building Healthy Brains series with Dr. Irving Vega. We're really looking forward to another great session. We've been learning a lot through the three-part series that we've been having here at GRPL. And to introduce Dr. Vega, Dr. Vega is an associate professor of translational neuroscience at Michigan State University. Before coming to MSU, Dr. Vega studied biology at the University of Puerto Rico and gained his PhD in cell biology and neuroscience at Rutgers University. His studies also include a postdoctoral fellowship in neuroscience at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. And he wanted me to let you all know that the MCC-FAD, the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease, is looking for participants for their research volunteer directory, and the link is included in the chat. And I did sign up myself, and it's a way that you can give back to the community and learn about studies where professionals like Dr. Vega are trying to discover the cures and origins and understanding of the disease Alzheimer's. So thank you very much, Dr. Vega. Really appreciate you being here, and take it away.
Thank you, Steve. And I will talk a little bit more about our directory for research volunteers that actually is for people interested to hear more about clinical trials at the end of the presentation. Out of this series, now we are on presentation number 3, our third presentation that we're going to talk about healthy brains in the golden years and how people that are in their 60s or older can maintain a healthy brain and reduce the risk of developing diseases like Alzheimer disease. For today, our objectives will be to understand the basis of Alzheimer disease and related dementias, to identify signs associated with Alzheimer disease. Early detection is essential to have a better quality of life, and also the treatments that are available for Alzheimer disease and all related dementias work better at the early stages. So early detection is key. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how to reduce the risk of developing these diseases, how to maintain a healthy brain. And so dementia is an umbrella term. It's used to describe a series of diseases and also, but in particular, symptoms that are related to damage to the brain. So changes or damages to the brain that leads to cognitive, behavioral, or disorientation changes that affects the daily life of daily living activities of the individual are collectively known as dementia, but dementia is that syndrome. It's that collection of symptoms. It's not an actual disease. Among that collection of symptoms, there are specific diseases. The best known dementia is Alzheimer disease, and it's because it affects it's about 60% of the people that suffer from dementia is actually Alzheimer disease type. The second most common one is vascular dementia. Vascular dementia is actually the etiology of the cause of the disease is more related to cerebrovascular lesions in the brain that accumulate to age, and in a way can be preventable, but is actually really linked in some aspects to Alzheimer disease, and sometimes they are both confused. Some vascular disease, dementia is actually diagnosed as Alzheimer disease, and some Alzheimer disease is actually diagnosed as vascular dementia. So those two, the most common one, are very interlinked. There is also dementia with Lewy bodies and frontotemporal dementia, other two types of dementia that are prevalent in the community. We're not going to talk too much about them, but I just want to mention that, again, dementia is just a general term, and the diseases are actually Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, the most prominent one. These diseases, in this case, I'm going to emphasize on Alzheimer's disease, but all neurodegenerative diseases are actually accumulation of lesions to the brain at a specific sites that accumulate through time. So that's why our neurodegeneratives, because they accumulate, the lesions accumulate through time and affects, and you can distinguish these diseases because the lesions or the pathological events take place on a specific brain regions. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, the first region that is affected is that is specializes in learning and memory. Is the region that we use to learn new tasks, and actually the ones that also facilitate the retrieval of memory. So that's why, as we understand Alzheimer's disease, one of the first symptoms is memory loss or problems with cognition. As the diseases, as the pathological process continue and progress, other brain regions are affected. And in the case of Alzheimer's disease, in addition to memory problems, then behavioral problems take place. And it's because the frontal lobe that deals with behavior reasoning and these executive tasks that we do in our daily activities are actually managed or controlled by our frontal lobe. As the pathology progresses to the frontal lobe, the clinical symptoms, the presentation of these symptoms lead more with behavioral changes. Then the pathological phenomena of pathological hallmarks start spreading through the brain, affecting the neocortex. Now, at that stage is when a person living with Alzheimer's disease will actually forget even the name of the wife or husband, children, close relatives, and even the place where they are at that moment. Is because it's spread to the neocortex where memory, long-term memory is stored. And then at the parietal or motor cortex is affected, the individual then is bedbound and is the latest stages when the person will die. Unfortunately, the diseases are lethal right now. We don't know. We don't have any way right now to modify the disease progression. So a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or other dementias is a terminal diagnosis. As you can see, the disease progresses, causing damage to the brain. This is how a normal brain looks like, and this is how a brain that endures Alzheimer's disease will look like. These areas here are known as gyroses. So you see how the shrink of these gyroses take place in Alzheimer's disease, and the space between are known as cell size, and those spaces are widened in Alzheimer's disease, and that is because of the loss of neurons and cells of the nervous system that actually manage the communication and control all the activities in the brain that lead us to learning and memory, for example, or other activities that take place in our brain. The pathological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease are amyloid plaques that are aggregated in the extracellular space outside of the neurons and other cells in the brain. And these are formed of a peptide of 42 amino acid long. And again, it's an aggregation of these peptides that accumulate in the extracellular space. Then in the intracellular space, meaning inside the neurons, there is another protein that aggregates and form these tangles, neurofibrillary tangles inside the cells. The presence of these two pathological hallmarks, the tangles and the plaques, is what neuropathologists use to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. Currently, there is only the clinical presentation, the characteristic presentation at the clinic that a neurologist can say that is probable or possible Alzheimer's disease. But a definite diagnosis only takes place post-mortem if the person donates the brain or request neuropathological analysis, when these two pathological hallmarks are present, then the definite diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is done. And these two pathological hallmarks have been studied because, again, is what defines Alzheimer's disease, the accumulation of these two. And it led to the what we know as the amyloid cascade hypothesis. Is one of the hypotheses that explain the pathological phenomenon of the pathological process that leads to Alzheimer's disease. And is, again, the aggregation of those peptides of 42 amino acids, 40 to 42 amino acids that take place in the brain. And and the hypothesis goes that that aggregation leads to or mediates the aggregation of another protein called tau that form these tangles. So these are the extracellular aggregates, and this is the aggregates inside the neurons. Once those aggregates of tau, those tangles are formed, then that leads to neuronal death. First neuronal dysfunction, then death. As the neurons die, then the clinical presentation of dementia takes place. This is the most accepted and current hypothesis to explain Alzheimer's disease, but it's not the only one. Unfortunately, the use of this hypothesis to develop therapeutics that modify the disease progression has lead to dead ends. And we don't have right now a compound or a drug that can affect the progression of the disease, meaning the accumulation of these pathological hallmarks. Alzheimer's disease can be divided in two types of Alzheimer's disease based on the genetics. One is known as an early onset Alzheimer's disease, and the other one is late onset Alzheimer's disease. The early onset is 5% or less of all the Alzheimer's disease cases that we have currently in the world and in the United States. So these cases are mostly inherited, meaning that there is a mutation or changes in a particular gene that leads to the early onset, meaning before 65 years of age. And this is inherited, is usually present in families and in 2 generations. And again, that's only 5% or less of all Alzheimer's cases. So it's rare, but is what is known as inherited Alzheimer's disease. I don't like the term familial. It's just inherited through genetics. And then the other one is the late onset, which is idiopathic in nature, sporadic, meaning we don't have a specific gene that is associated with that onset, and that is 95% or more of the cases of Alzheimer's disease. And it's meaning that this is where, in that late onset Alzheimer's disease, is where the majority of the cases associated with Alzheimer's disease are. And again, we don't understand the etiology, we don't understand still where what was that insult that lead to the progression of the pathological processes that leads to Alzheimer's disease. What we do know is that those late onset Alzheimer's disease are the majority of the cases. And this is prevalence, meaning cases per 1,000 persons. And what you can see here is that the first thing that you can see in this graph is that progression of the disease through the accumulation of cases through age increases as people are older. So there is more probability of developing Alzheimer's disease of those that are between 65 and 74. That increases between 75 and 84. And it can go to 50% probability when to those that are 85 or older. Another point that you can see in this graph is that there is health disparities associated with ethnicity. So there is more cases among African Americans and Hispanic than non-Hispanic whites. And without going into into details about that, we understand that the main reason for that disparity is due to social determinant of health that create that disparity between non-Hispanic whites and Hispanic and African Americans. But it's true regardless of the ethnic background, that as the person ages, the probability of developing Alzheimer's disease or related dementia increases. And that is due mainly to the accumulation of lesions throughout age and the aging process that is less efficient to repair those any insult that accumulates or any insult that takes place in the brain. So as we age, we lose the capacity to repair and to deal with these lesions that can accumulate in our brain. So having a healthy a lifestyle or quality of life is important, so that when we get to ages that are 85 or older, we have that brain robust, so that we can sustain or better deal with lesions to our brain. And one of the lesions that we come across now is COVID-19. I wanted to just mention this one because of the relevance right now. People that are 65 or older that suffer from COVID-19, it is important to realize that your brain, not only your lungs, but your brain was also affected. And if you have a neurologist, or if you don't have a neurologist right now, those that are 65 or older should go and visit, make an appointment with a neurologist right now. The first appointment can be 6 months to 8 month waiting time. So important, if you were infected by SARS-CoV-2 and you suffer from COVID-19, you should look for, and you are 65 or older and survive the disease, obviously you need to go and have a neurologist to talk about your symptoms, particularly if you suffer from lack of taste, lack of smell, what we understand now as brain fog, which is that confusion, disorientation that people that suffer from COVID-19 are experiencing. So it's important that, again, I want to emphasize that it's important that you go and visit a neurologist, because COVID-19 is being considered right now as a traumatic brain injury. There are studies actually that find the same biomarkers in the blood that are associated with traumatic brain injury are found also in individuals that survive from COVID-19. So COVID-19 is an insult to the brain that induces inflammation, and it needs to leads to or could be considered as a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia in the future. So if you are 65 or older and suffer from COVID-19, it's important that you visit your neurologist. So what are the symptoms and how we can identify early detection of Alzheimer's disease or dementia in general? So the first aspect is memory. In Alzheimer's disease, memory loss, misplacing belongings, hard to complete familiar tasks. For example, if the person used to pay the bills and now the person forgot to pay the bills, and it happened more than once. That is something that is have to raise a red flag and lead to a visit to the neurologist. Memory loss that affects the daily living activities is another sign that there's some problems with cognition, and it should prompt a visit to the neurologist. Disorientation, that is actually feeling confusion in time and place. Usually some of the first symptoms that people notice is that the person used to go to the supermarket to do grocery shopping, and now he or she find herself or himself in the parking lot and doesn't know how to come back to the house, or is it trying to go to the supermarket and lost track of the direction and now cannot find the place. So that is actually one symptoms or early sign that should prompt a visit to a neurologist. Another aspect is changes in reasoning and behavior, poor judgment, making accusations, or actually paying or making these donations out of the blue that are out of character, that not because of donations are bad, but because it's actually don't have the funds in the checking account and is doing those donations. So that is actually something that is should raise a red flag. Social withdrawal, usually the person knows that something is wrong and it goes to anxiety and depression, and the person can actually withdraw from social context to avoid that other people notice what is going on, and struggling with communication. So finding words and trying to call for something that is very common and now cannot find the words. So how we can prevent those symptoms to present themselves, and how what we can do to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. In those individuals that are 65 or older, a healthy diet and actually restriction, calorie restriction between 15,000 to 1,500 to 1,900 calories per day is something that should be considered. And changes in the diet, meaning reducing saturated fats, increasing fruits and vegetables, eating instead of saturated fats, eating fatty fish like salmon, because they're high on omega-3. Having carbohydrates, fiber, those are important because generate not only good for because of the fiber, but also good sugar, glucose that is good for our brain, since glucose is the main source of energy for our brain. Antioxidants, like those found in red wine or green tea, are actually important. Those wine and green tea has these polyphenols that are actually good antioxidants for the brain. So a small glass of wine a day could have good amount of polyphenols to deal and establish those radicals that accumulate throughout the day in the brain. But those that are 65 years of older should also consider supplements, vitamin supplements, because they have there are specific vitamins that are important for the brain. For example, vitamin D and vitamin E. Vitamin D is actually an important one because it actually facilitates neurogenesis. It's just that we have stem cells in our brain, and actually vitamin D, it helps those as a neurotrophic factor, help those stem cells to develop neurons and actually promote the formation of new connections in the brain. So that is important to have a supplement of vitamin D, especially in Michigan that we live, and in the winter we don't have that much sun. It's good to have a supplement of vitamin D. Vitamin E is an important antioxidant, and actually it removes those reactive oxygen species that accumulate in the brain. So vitamin D and vitamin E are as a supplement is really important for those that are 65 years or older. Another vitamin that I would like to emphasize is the complex of vitamin B, in particular vitamin B12. So actually someone with deficiency in vitamin B12 could present as someone that is living with dementia. So, and just bringing up vitamin B12 can bring that person back. So those that are 65 years of older, having a complex vitamin B supplement, but in particular, vitamin 12 is really essential. Vitamin C is also considered an antioxidant, and it should be supplemented too, not only because of the effect that is good for the brain, but also to the immune system. And in neurodegeneration, the activation, the wrong activation of the immune system is something that we want to fight. We don't want that wrong activation of the immune system. So in the case of for the brain, again, the main aspect is that it's a very good antioxidant and can protect our brain from those reactive oxygens that accumulate throughout the day. So as we age, especially those that are 65 years or older, a quality of sleep is important. That means at least from 6 to 8 hours. And if you can have a nap, or how we call it siesta during the day, that will be really good for your brain, because when we go to that deep sleep, our brain flushes all those toxins that accumulate throughout the day. So a good quality of sleep where we go to that deep sleep stage clear our brain of toxins. Reducing stress through exercise is an important aspect too, because again, we are eliminating toxins that accumulate throughout the day. I know the COVID-19 pandemic affects socialization, but it's important that you keep engaged with your friends through phone or calling them and talking by the phone. But now, the restrictions are being released, so we can go into more socialization right now as people get vaccinated with COVID-19. And learn a new task or challenge yourself to learn a new language or a new activity or a new game, board game, is something that keeps your brain, no matter what age you are, learning something new, it keeps that brain healthy and engaged. So those are aspects of quality of life that you should consider, and in order to keep a healthy brain. With that, I think I went over time, but I will take any questions that the participants may have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Vega. That was a great presentation as always. And if you do have a question for Dr. Vega, he'd be more than happy to take them. If you just either type it into the chat or the Q&A function, we'd be more than happy to take your questions now. Well, Dr. Vega, I do have a question for you in terms of the vitamins that you mentioned. The kind of research that supports that, what kind of vitamins have been tested? Because I know that, like the laws for medical supplements in the country are of a different ilk than the ones for medicine itself. So is there a certification you should look for, or something like that when it comes to vitamins?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, these supplements are, like as you point out, they are not under the same regulation of other like other drugs, like the regulation to the Food and Drug Administration. So it's important that you see who actually endorsed that brand. Usually this brand, in order to differentiate themselves, they look for endorsement from an organization like the nutritionist or association and things like that. So you geriatrics associations. So you should look for who endorsed those that brand that is send you the vitamin, that the vitamin supplement that you are buying. And if you should actually look for the recommendation from your physician as well. And if the group has a nutritionist associated with them, is the person that you should ask for a specific brand. In terms of the research for the vitamin, there have been research done at a high dosages for this vitamin. For example, for vitamin E. But it's important to point out that this is to protect. It's more for protection and to reduce the risk rather than to do a disease modification or modifying the steps or the progression of the disease. It's more to actually reduce the risk rather than change the progression or inhibit the accumulation of these pathological hallmarks that I mentioned.
And I do have one more question for you. In terms of the Alzheimer's research that you're seeing, is there a particular tack that people are taking that's the most promising that we should be on the lookout for, in the future? I know that medical science takes a long time for consensus building, but is there a way of understanding the disease or attacking the disease or even leaning towards a cure that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, right now there is, and it's gonna be in the news in the next few weeks, actually at the beginning of June, there is a new therapy. It's actually antibodies that are gonna be, that can be infused in the hospital setting. And those antibodies can go and affect the accumulation of those plaques that I mentioned in the brain. And that it went to the first board at the FDA, and it was denied. Now they have more data, and they're gonna go again for emergency use authorization of these new treatment. As you mentioned, the scientific community is split. Actually, I think there's more against than in favor, but it's a split right now for the FDA to approve this, and it's the one that you will hear in the next few weeks. It's particularly at the beginning of June, and they claim that it leads to modification of disease progression, and that some people have even revert from the accumulation of these peptides. These plaques have been cleared from the brain, but there is a lot of issues with it that it will take another hour to discuss. But it's the one that is coming up, and there are other ones. There are over 30 or more clinical trials ongoing right now, Alzheimer disease, for drugs, for compounds, and there are other ones that are observational. That's why, as you mentioned, the directory is so important, because we want people to participate. We want to help them understand the importance of it. So completing this survey allow us to give you information about the clinical trial. It doesn't mean that you are part of a clinical trial. It means that we can give you information about clinical trials that you may be able to benefit and participate, especially to enhance the participation of Latinos and African Americans in these clinical trials.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Vega. We're looking forward to your Spanish language session in just a few minutes here. And thank you all for coming. And you can see the like we said in the beginning, the link to the directory is in the chat right now. So if you want to click on that and register, you can get updates on possible studies and things like that in the future. So again, thank you, Dr. Vega. We appreciate your time, and everyone have a good day.